Welcome back to the Chad X podcast. It's your host, Chad. As always, I'm joined by my co host, Ferris. Say hi to the people, Ferris.
Hey guys.
And we're going to get right into it today. We're going to start with our number one story of the day. So, this is sort of something that's been building for a while now. I guess you could say over the past few years, but realistically over the past few months. And it's finally gone into place in that Viktor Orban, the former leader of Hungary, he's been in charge of that country for about 16 years, and his Fidesz party has pretty much dominated politics there for the past 2 decades. Finally lost an election to Peter Magyar, the new current leader who was installed with his government at the end of May. I want to just give some background to the people here. Peter Magyar is a big change in the sense that he's not Viktor Orban, but in terms of his domestic politics, in terms of views on the economy, immigration, the fertility rate, not that much of a change. We do support him because he's much younger than Viktor Orban was. Viktor Orban was part of that old
Mhm.
post-Soviet boomerocracy that really runs a lot of Eastern European politics. But Peter Magyar is, he's younger, he's in his 40s. We really want to support him as he takes over, even though, in terms of actual domestic policy, not at all that different from Viktor Orban. The primary differences he has is that he's more pro EU and is really trying to bring back the Visegrad Group. The Visegrad Group is a coalition of Hungary, Czechia, Poland, and Slovakia that are Eastern European countries that historically have tried to serve as a counterbalance to what they view as Western European dominance in the EU, notably Germany and France, and prior to Brexit, the UK. But right now, Germany and France in particular are viewed as sort of the power players in the EU, and they want Eastern European interests to be more focused on. So they all sort of team up and act as a group, and he's really big on keeping the EU intact and keeping them, opposed to Russian dominance of Eastern Europe, but he wants the Eastern European interest to be sort of pushed at the forefront. Poland is also very deeply invested in that because they have a real historical reasons to be against Russian expansion and Russian influence. They've been invaded by them several times in the past few hundred years. So it makes sense that they're trying to bring that group back and that Poland will still invest in this. It seems like this is really going to bring Hungary back on the European side in terms of their politics. They've been sort of trying to play both sides, operate as a middleman that just gets everything they can out of both people with Orban, which has sort of been his method in domestic politics as well, because he was known as one of the most corrupt politicians in Europe. Several of his childhood friends became billionaires through different business adventures they got through working with Orban or just through growing up with him and being his friend. And that's sort of how Magyar and his new party, which is still a very conservative movement, very, very politically aligned, I would say, with Orban in everything except his pro EU stance and his anti corruption stance. One of the reasons that this is finally breaking through, and this has finally been the election cycle in which Orban was defeated, is that there was a few years ago, in 2024, there was a high profile, I want to say like an Epstein affiliate. He wasn't really affiliated with Epstein, but he was sort of the Epstein of Hungary, who, through some donations, through some corruption, through giving some money to members of the Fidesz party, was acquitted of all charges, even though there was ample evidence to show that he had abused some children in nefarious ways. So ultimately, this has really been an interesting time, and I'm really interested to see how Hungary is going to move going forward. He's clearly stated, Mr. Magyar, that he is much more pro EU. I want to see how that all plays out as we move towards what looks to be, late stage movements within the war in Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia are sort of at a stalemate, but Ukraine is taking on using drone attacks in various Russian sites. There was recently a meeting where the Russian delegation hosted leaders from various countries. He had the vice president of China, he had a lot of the Gulf country monarchs and people from Saudi Arabia and those regions in, and a drone attack was sent in to attack that meeting in St. Petersburg. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in that front. So we're going to see how this really affects how Hungary's election really will affect that situation and just the broader changes that are happening in Europe right now. Your thoughts on the situation, Ferris?
I think, like you said in the beginning, when explaining the situation, it actually is perfectly interpretates what we talk about about the podcast, what the podcast is about, which is promoting more young guys and get rid of all the boomers and old guys. Uh, I think they did a good job for themselves. It's not too much a difference from Orban to Magyar, except the fact that Magyar is more pro EU, more anti Russia, uh, and the fact that everything else, and then more. I guess as of right now, less corruption. And when I read an article, is he recently he just announced that to help with the public trust, because the public has a lot of distrust regarding to the government right now. But to have a lot of trust, what he has done recently was like slash his salary. I don't think not only his salary, but a lot of the people in the government salary in half. So I think it was like 200 and something thousand pounds a year he would make. Now it's like 100. I think 220,000 pounds a year. Now it's 110,000 pounds a year he's making. Like roughly the
Wow.
equivalence, which is pretty interesting thing to do. It's like saying, okay, I'm not corrupt. I'm gonna slash my thing to kind of prove that, okay, I'm gonna make you guys trust me, show you guys trust. Because right now there's a lot of distrust to the government because of the corrupt scandals, especially when it comes to Orban. Where one good example is like how Orban had his like, if I remember, it was like his childhood friend or one of his childhood friends. Um, he became one of the richest or the richest guy in Hungary or something like that out of nowhere, and that's all because of Orban and his corruption. That's what I thought was kind of pretty fascinating.
Yeah, if we're gonna have any corruption, it should be corruption in certain, for younger people. Well, let's get these old guys out the way, right? What do
Exactly.
they need all this money for? Let's just confiscate it off of them. Yeah, no, it is interesting
Exactly.
though. It is definitely interesting how it's all happened so fast. I mean, we've been seeing a lot of protests, a lot of the Gen Z protests is what they're being called, where had them in Madagascar. We got a lot of people all around the world trying to just have a revolt against the old entrenched ruling class, and it makes sense that it's happening in Eastern Europe because Eastern Europe is the most primed to have something like that happen. They are just really about to have a full-on crisis in terms of the pensions and just the funds that are going towards so much of their aging population as their youth both one have worse economic prospects overall and two are leaving. A lot of them are leaving and they're just shrinking. People weren't having children as much, so there's fewer of them. And the people that are the children, or not even the children, but the youth that are still there, the under 30s in those countries, are not seeing opportunities because the boomers won't get out the way. So I'm glad, at least in terms of politics, he was able to push somebody through. The fact that he's slashing the entire government salaries is also interesting because there's been a lot of political theory around what that does. Are you supposed to pay your public servants more or less? How much should politicians be paid? Are they more or less likely to accept a bribe if they make more money? You know what I mean? There's a lot of theory that says, especially in the United States, I've been keeping up with this, where they say Congress should be paid highly. They should be making almost more than you can make working in the private sector, so they're less susceptible to bribes or lobbying efforts that are like, hey, we'll get you a private sector job post your career where you can make 500,000 a year, since we know you're not getting paid a lot right now if you just do whatever corporate interests want. So I'm interested to see how that'll work out. This idea that in his anti-corruption efforts, he's actually telling everybody, hey, you're going to make way less money both on the front end in terms of your salary as a government official, as an elected official, and on the back end because if we catch you taking the bribes you've been taking to support your lifestyle, you're going to jail. I mean, it's very strict, it's very hard line, but that may be just what Eastern European needs. They're used to a little bit of authoritarianism in that region, maybe more than we are here in the U.S. or in other Western countries. So, what works works. I
Yeah.
hope it works for them. I'm always against corruption, of course. If you're working for the government, your job is to promote things that are for the good of the people, not just the people you know. So hey. Speaking of Gen Z protests and protest movements in general that I'm picking up, Ferris has an interesting story about what's going on in Albania that he wants to let us know about. Go ahead and take that, Ferris.
Hey guys, so one thing we want to discuss again regarding Albania, there's been some huge issues going on, a lot of protests, huge protests going on the last, I think, 5 to 6 days it's been now, because of two things that were announced. One being like, is the prime minister of Albania, I think his name is Edu or something like that. Uh, he basically sold land to two people, to Israel and to Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. And specifically with the Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, this island that they sold, it's a natural preserved island. It's like government protected. Both of them actually are the one that they sold to Israel and the one they sold to Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. Chad did some extra research and we chatted about this, and it had regard to like flamingos. So that's why they call it the flamingo protest. Um, I'm kind of curious to see how it's going to go. And there was even reports today that came out. The prime minister himself went out and told the people, like, basically to Be quiet. I don't care if you have if it's 5,000 protesters or 500,000 protesters. I'm not changing my mind. It's already too late. I'm not gonna do it. And I think that's going to spark a lot of outrage. And Albanians are just frustrated right now. They're like, "That's you." It's, first of all, you can't change the law from what it was with regard to that land. That land is supposed to be preserved, not supposed to be sold. And this prime minister is saying, "Oh, that land is going to bring a lot of economic boom to the country."
Yeah, definitely.
So
Speaking
yeah,
of, leaders who have been in power for decades, Eddie Rama, the leader of Albania, he's been in charge since 2013. So this is another like Viktor Orban style guy who's been in charge for a long
Mhm.
time and has a lot of corruption allegations on his name. And I mean, it seems like lately, anytime you have like a Trump family associate, in particular Jared Kushner, involved in a deal internationally, it seems like there's going to be corruption allegations involved. A lot of people are saying we're moving towards an oligarchy, and it's the Trump family that are making the business moves and around the world. And it's like you pay off one of the Trump associates, you pay off Kushner, you pay off Ivanka, you set up a good business for Don Jr. To make a couple million in your country, and you get whatever you want from the American government. So this may be another example of that, where Eddie Rama's trying to get some favors from the American government. I mean, they have recently had a lot of issues with their neighbor Azerbaijan, so it could be something related to that. Maybe Trump's trying to get them involved in the Iran war. There's so many ways this could be interpreted if you're really trying to get through the intentions. It could also just be that he's taking a bribe. You know what I mean? That they came through and said,
Mhm.
"We'll give you this amount of money to give us access to these ecologically protected zones so we can develop them into resorts for rich people or for Israelis to go in case they run out of bomb shelters. They can just hide some of their people over there." There's a lot going on. I mean, there was a lot going on in Argentina where there were some fires and people were thinking they were set by the Israeli government so they could buy up some land that Argentinian people were taking up. It's just a really interesting times in terms of international corruption, as some of the countries that have held themselves up for a long time as bastions of freedom and not being opaque, being
Mhm.
transparent about how they do things, namely, the U.S. Even if that wasn't accurate, they at least made every effort to make it seem they were doing things that way. And it seems like they're not even going to put up the pretense of that anymore. So I'm really interested to see how that affects countries that already had a reputation of corruption, like Hungary and, of course, Albania in this instance.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts on that situation, Ferris?
I think you nailed it right perfectly, dude. So I think it's just I think the only last thought I can think of is I think there's gonna be some sort of like I think the protest might escalate to much further than people would think, especially how reckless and how careless this guy is. Um, I really think something bad is gonna happen to him. I think they're gonna come after him personally. I really think they're going to. I think they're gonna like make him resign somehow, but he's gonna be gone soon. I don't think he's gonna last much longer because of how reckless, how careless he is.
Yeah, and one thing I really like about the two stories we've discussed today is that it kind of shows how this boomerocracy, this gerontocracy, these old people being corrupt and doing things in a dirty way, it extends past political parties. Like I said, Viktor Orban, very much a right wing leader. He's probably, some people describe him as far right. I would say he's firmly right. He's not center right. He's not far right. He's just firmly right wing. The leader, Eddie Rama of Albania, though, he's a member of the Socialist Party. You could probably describe him as far left in terms of, international politics, but he's equally corrupt and he's an old man. He's in his 60s. He was born in 1964, tail end of being a boomer, so he just made the cut. And he's corrupt just
Mhm.
like all the rest of them are. So it's not really a left or right issue. It really is, are these old people going to keep sacrificing the future of young people so that they can line their pockets today? We're seeing it with right wing leaders. We're seeing it with left wing leaders, and we saw a traditional against the right wing leader, traditional Democratic people went out and voted, and that's how they got the corruption out of there. We saw that type of win, and now we're seeing, like you said, maybe a more underhanded, a little more shadowy type of revolution where it's like, hey, they might come after him, not necessarily politically, but physically. He might be in danger in Albania. A lot of people are very upset with the results of the territory loss. Nagorno-Karabakh, like they've lost a lot of territory to Azerbaijan, and they've lost a lot of international reputation by being completely decimated by that early example of drone warfare almost a decade ago at this point. So it really does remain to be seen how much longer he can hold on to power, whether it's through electoral defeat for his socialist party, or whether he's just ultimately crushed by somebody who doesn't like him. A crowd goes after him and takes care of him. And that brings us to our final story, which isn't as much related to international politics, but it does affect young people being oppressed by a government. So, the Iranian soccer team, or football team for our international listeners, ahead of the World Cup, just got within this week at the time of recording, their visas approved to come to the United States for the World Cup. The World Cup is being held in North America. Some of the games are in Canada, some in Mexico, and many, of course, are in the United States. The Iranian team, due to the war in Iran, were the last team to get their visas approved, and some people thought the players weren't all going to be approved to come over to compete. But they were. Unfortunately, everybody who wasn't a coach or a player that's on their team, some of their training staff, their media members, the executive director of the whole program and organization, were not able to get their visas approved by the Trump administration, and therefore they're going to have to relocate their training camp from Arizona and Los Angeles, which is where their first game is going to be played, which is in the Los Angeles area, down to Tijuana. So it's going to be a similar time getting over. They're almost equidistant. Southern California borders Mexico really heavily, so it's not a huge issue in terms of the time that it's going to change, but it is a bit embarrassing that every other organization from around the world, all the other 47 teams that are competing in the World Cup, were able to get all their team members' visas approved to come over. But Iran, not only did the coaches and the players have to wait until the last minute when the World Cup is coming up at time of recording, once again, within the next week, they also had to relocate their training camp. Any thoughts on this one, Ferris?
Um, I just found it fascinating. I'll be honest with you, because I can bring in. I'm gonna bring in something else regarding to that topic. It's right after I discussed specifically with Iran in the World Cup. Um, the good thing is, like, at least they're able to be playing for the World Cup. I think it's kind of ridiculous. I understand the U.S. and them are in a war right now, but like in the same time, I don't think it was right that happened to them. I don't think it was fair per se. That they were like they had to like do so, like change all the logistics for them be able to play in the World Cup, which is an international competition. Um, like from what I see with them being in Mexico, it doesn't really affect them at all. Like for their flight wise and whatnot. So it's gonna all work out well. So the real question though is if they make it out of the group stage and they go to the next round, what's gonna happen after that? Because what happens is some of these games are more in the East Coast instead of the West. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean they'd maybe have
and
to relocate to Canada, but Canada kind of just moves in lockstep with the U.S. So it's all the way around. It's just a
yeah,
big cluster. It's a bad situation. It's a pile of
yeah,
crap. But I mean this is
yes,
maybe the least important or least relevant to the most people example of old people oppressing the young. But the politicians in
mm,
America are not helping these young soccer players. Perform their
agreed.
best at what may be the biggest event of their lives. Competing for their country. So
Yeah.
all the way around a rough
Also wanted to
situation.
bring up one thing, Chad, regarding to this, because there's been a lot of topic regarding to like other teams not be able to like fans and players be having issues with visas coming in. I remember a Moroccan player at Wahbi had an issue. I saw there's like what's it called? Think it was Scotland fans. They were having a hard time. They got some of their visa rejected, and they lost thousands from that. I'm trying to remember. There's other countries that are really getting affected regarding to the visa restrictions. So there's been a lot of doubt and big question mark regarding to this World Cup being some sort of quote unquote success, because it's like I don't understand like what's going on. I did see that the one big thing that I kind of agreed with, I won't lie, was like, see, there was this big situation where the U.S. kind of threatened the Congo national team. They basically said like, do not for their players to not go back to Congo because they're having right now an Ebola outbreak over there, and
Yeah,
basically they said like if you go back there you're gonna have to quarantine and we're not gonna let you come in for like 20 something days, which I can agree with because it's just gonna be if they bring if one of the players somehow contracts Ebola and they come to the US, that can make a massive spread, especially in a big world event like that.
for sure. Yeah, I mean it's a crazy situation all the way around. Like with everything that's going on in Central Africa, they're also recently had the Central African branch of the Islamic State terror group of ISIS, risking going like a
Yeah,
rampage, capture a lot of groups, and there I said like HIV is spreading way more rapidly because of some of the stuff going on over there. So all around, it's always rough in Central Africa, and then the Rwandan invasion. There's just been a lot going on in that region, so I definitely understand why they would tell some of those players, hey, if you can avoid going back to the region for your safety and probably the safety of other competitors, just avoid that and try to stay in North America if you can. So that is one example that makes sense. But I mean, in regards to just other people having visa issues, we are currently in the midst of probably the most anti-immigration administration in history, both legal and illegal. You know what I mean? They've been a bit anti H-1B, and obviously the people, they did win an election probably on the strength of how strong the anti-illegal immigration sentiment is in the United States right now. So there's all the way around, it makes sense that if there was ever a time where hosting a huge international competition was going to be hard, it would be during this administration. But hey, I hope all the players who are able to contribute are able to make it over and really help their team perform to the best of their ability. I'm rooting for young people, and historically, professional athletes tend to be on the younger side. I haven't seen a lot of boomers on the pitch lately, so I'm happy about that at least, that it's all going to get resolved positively, or I'm hopeful at least that it'll all get resolved positively. That's going to be all for us today. I thank you guys for listening, and let us know in the comments what's a story you want us to cover for next week, or anything that we missed on this week, and who are you rooting for in the World Cup? As always, this has been Chad, my co-host Ferris. Say bye to the people, Ferris.
Ladies, guys. Pleasure.
Please like and subscribe, and leave a comment.